Welcome to 101. I'm Greg Bassett, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. It's a big day here at PAC 14. They're all big, but we've got one of my favorite public servants in the House, the director of the Wicomico County Board of Elections, Anthony Gutierrez. Welcome, sir.
Great to be here again.
So I understand things are a little bit intense in your workspace right now with an election coming up and so many questions. We wanted to get you in here so you can answer all the questions that people keep asking me.
Very busy time. We really aren't busy this early in the cycle, but of course with COVID and everything and the great amount of interest in the election, it's not surprising really.
So this time around, Election Day is November 3rd.
Yes.
We're going to have early voting when?
Early voting will be for 8 days, but this time it'll be Monday, October 26th through Monday, November 2nd, including the Saturday and Sunday in between.
Really? Okay, so Saturday, Sunday too?
Yes, we normally do that, but it's usually a week ahead of the election. So
Right.
for this cycle, will be Monday through Monday, ending on November 2nd. But the Civic Center will also be a vote center on November 3rd.
Right. So all the early voting will be done at the Civic Center.
That's correct, in Wicomico County.
And what about the voting on November 3rd? Will that also be in precincts or will it just be at the Civic Center?
Well, the governor agreed with the state board's plan to only open a few vote centers. When we were trying to make our plans to carry out his directive early on to do a full regular election, all polling places, a lot of counties, especially across the bridge, were falling way short of election judges. At that time, when the compromise was made, we were about 100, 125 short of our goal for a regular election. So once the compromise was approved by the governor to open vote centers, that immediately solved our problem for us.
So there will be, I mean, if I live in Quantico, can I vote at the Quantico, the West Side Elementary School, or where would it be that I would go vote?
Yes, we'll have 7 vote centers, which were approved by our local board.
Okay.
And that includes, again, the Civic Center, plus 6 schools, 2 of the high schools, Bennett and Mardella, 2 of the middle schools, Salisbury Middle and Bennett Middle, and 2 of the elementary schools, Beaver Run and Pemberton.
Okay. And those are places that are big enough you can sort of spread out for people who might be concerned about that.
Yes, and we've added Bennett High and Bennett Middle. We've not been there before. Those are the new locations. Bennett High looks really good after 10 years
Right.
of use. But we're in the gymnasiums, a very big space, a long hallway at Bennett Middle to do our social distancing, so those should work out fine. And the other locations have been used in previous presidential general elections. But again, the difference this year, one of the many differences, is that a voter on Election Day can go to any one of those vote centers.
Okay, let's repeat that because that's really important. You don't have to go to where you live. You can go anywhere that's open.
That's right. The vote center concept, I believe, was pioneered in Colorado a few decades ago. They are now, I believe, an all mail-in ballot state, but before they created the concept of, instead of opening hundreds of polling places and you had to go to that polling place to get your ballot, then they went to just a few vote centers, much more economical for them. They were able to put a lot more staff and a lot more equipment and do better customer service at a vote center. So again, in Wicomico for this November, you can go to any one of those 7 locations. However, we are still joining Governor Hogan in trying to ask every Maryland voter, Wicomico voter included, to please consider the mail-in ballot process. It's still the safest, quickest way for us to process your ballot, and that's safety for not only the voter, which is paramount, but the election judges who are volunteering to go out to these vote centers. And during early voting, some people won't get a ballot for a number of reasons, unfortunately, or special needs voter is a person who will want to go and make use of the ballot marking device with its special features that it has for accommodations. And so we know today, we've known since mid-August, we will have long lines at vote centers on Tuesday, November 3rd. We've got to do social distancing, the 6 foot. We've got to clean the machines and the voting booths after every single voter. Our judges have to switch out periodically so they're not exposed during long periods of time. So again, whenever you see this, we know now, more than 2 months ahead of November 3rd, there will be long lines on November 3rd at the vote centers. COVID restrictions, unfortunately, are going to make that. So if please consider
Right.
not putting yourself in that situation.
Right. I want to talk a lot about mail-in, but I want to talk about the judges real quick because people don't seem to understand the risks that are happening to the judges, that so many people are coming into contact with them that day. Hundreds and hundreds of people. And if you look at the election judges, and this is nothing negative, they're not the youngest people of our herd. They're a lot of the older people are working as judges. It's a great thing that they do, that they're there all
Yes.
day. I mean, you know how hard they work. And I know how hard it is to get election judges now, and especially with the suspicion about what COVID could do to me if I want to be an election judge, I have to take that into consideration before I show up at a polling place.
Absolutely. The secret to Wicomico election success over the years has been our election judges and, of course, our staff. But at the polling places on election days, those are the ones who are processing people through, and our experienced judges, as you mentioned, who've worked 3 or 4 or 5 election cycles, they know how to get a long line through in a presidential general election.
Right.
So when the call went out a few months ago that we need more people, we were blessed with a very big outpouring from the community. But our preference certainly is to have experienced judges, because in an emergency situation, for example, you could call out, for example, let's say the National Guard, and have a person standing at every station. But if they're not familiar with the process and they've had a 4-hour training session, it's like trying to drink from a fire hose. And I would liken it to the game of football, for example. You can tell somebody the rules and then put them out on the field just to have 11 persons. And let's say you have half experience and half brand new off the street, ready to go, perhaps a younger group of people, and lots of energy, but they don't have the experience. And so you might be able to pull off a practice game in a field of touch football for half the players have never played, but they read the rule book, right? Well, let's try to do that same with the Super Bowl. I mean, infinite number of more points of failure and more pressure, long lines. It's a whole other ballgame than just a regular election day, than a November presidential. So we want as our most experienced judges, who, as you say, are older generation like myself, and exposing them to the risk. And as we know, COVID seems to have more an effect on older. So again, we're very, very grateful, and we need that experience. But the fewer people they have to process on election day, number one, it's less risk for them. Number two, less risk for the voters. So if we have hundreds versus thousands of voters on November 3rd, we want to offer that mail-in ballot process. We've heard the stories about the postal system. We're going to get 4 official drop boxes. That's double what we had in the primary.
Right.
And our board wants to spread those out around the county. And there's the 8 days of early voting that I mentioned. Those days should be shorter lines. Again, the Midway Room is a nice big area. We can put more judges, more equipment than at the schools on November 3rd. So if you have to, or we certainly respect, a lot of people want to go in person. Absolutely, we want to be there for you. Please consider early voting. Saturday and Sunday afternoons are a great time to go with shorter lines, etc.
Right. The judges, and I just want to talk about them real quick again, because people always tell me about voter fraud and that kind of thing. And I would kind of laugh about that, the need for photo IDs for voting, because the election judges where I've always voted knew me. So when I was in the line, and they would ask my address and they would look at me, and it wasn't like an intimidating thing at all. It was just like they're doing their job to make sure this is really that guy that's the name on the thing, and they'll ask your address or whatever, and just the confidence with which you give your address, whether it's rehearsed or it's really your address, they are checking if you are really who you say you are at the time. So there was no way that I could ever see that anyone could really vote in a fraudulent way, because these men and women who were at the table were doing their jobs.
And more importantly, we're following current Maryland state election law. If the legislature went back into session next January and passed voter ID or any other measures, we would follow whatever the policymakers, the
Right.
governor and the legislature wanted us to do at the time. So again, they're following the right procedures. They're doing all the right things. Experienced judges know that a brand new person coming in off the street, although with great enthusiasm, that's the time you might have mistakes made.
Right, right, absolutely. So even with all the centers open, all the names are going to be on the books. It's not just the people who are registered to that one precinct. At every voting location, every voting center, all the names for all the registered voters in the county will be there to be checked against.
That's correct. It'll be very much like the early voting center. When I think we were about 30% in 2018, so it's becoming more and more popular in Wicomico.
Right.
And again, we're able to accommodate more voters in a larger space. So you walk into any one of those vote centers on November 3rd if you need to, and all the voters in the county will be on that electronic poll book.
Right. Now, early voting has made it harder for me because classically the newspaper will do the big election preview the week before the election. But now with early voting gaining, I'm going to have to do election previews in October rather than like the end of October or the first week of November to make sure that readers know who they could vote for because they're going to go in there so much earlier.
Right, and another point I could make is that we were again given permission by the state board to pre-process those mail-in ballots, just as we did for the primary. And the reason it's more important in November is because we've got to meet a federal deadline to report Maryland's results, official final results, before the Electoral College meets in December, mid-December.
Right.
And if you miss that deadline, I don't think it's ever happened in the history of our country that a state was late. And so to prevent that for, again, the larger counties, Montgomery, Prince George's, et cetera, across the bridge, they needed that processing time ahead to get it all done by those deadlines.
Okay, so the mail-in stuff, we here we're very much experts in absentee voting. We know how to do that, where you apply for a ballot, the ballot's mailed to you, and you send it back in. There are other processes where they would just send you the ballots to anyone who's registered, and then you would mail it in. What's our process going to be? Is it going to be the classic absentee, or are you going to mail ballots to everybody?
There are so many changes, and voters are upset, and I don't blame them one bit. A lot of them, the decisions were just made in the last few weeks,
Right.
and people want that information to act on, which also prevented us from putting things out on the website. As I mentioned, we were preparing to fulfill the governor's order for full polling place election, 32 polling places. If somebody heard that and then didn't get the message about 7 vote centers, they're going to go on November 3rd to their polling. So again, much change.
And the governor made a mistake. Not made a mistake. That's what he wanted to do, and the backlash was substantial.
Well, again, at the time, he didn't know we were going to run into problems with the judge, so I certainly wouldn't say he made a mistake.
Yeah.
The state board was unable to come to a super majority and follow our election director's proposals to either do, I don't want to go into
Sure, I understand.
what could have, should have, would have.
Right.
But where we are now, and back to your original question, I'm no longer allowed to say absentee. A state law was passed, and as election officials, we're supposed to say mail-in ballot.
Right.
There's no more absentee
Right.
in Maryland. So again, one more
that's
change.
an important point.
One more
Mail-in
change.
ballot, not absentee. But go ahead. Yeah.
Right. In Maryland, the mail-in ballot process is that you need to submit the application, and once you do that, send in that form or do it online, which is so much smoother for us, quicker, easier for you. Maryland State Board of Elections website, www.elections.maryland.gov. Then once we get that application submitted by a voter, it gives us permission to send out the official ballot. Now, the state board office and a printing company send out the official ballots. That's not done at the local level. And they're telling us that hopefully the targeted schedule is to do that the last week of September, so voters will start getting their official ballots sometime the first week of October.
Okay, so I want to vote, not absentee, but mail-in.
Ballot, yes.
So I either go online and request a ballot online,
Yes.
or do I call your office?
You can call our office, sure. Our local number is 410-548-4830. But we also did a statewide mailing. It was an envelope that came with a purple stripe on the
Just
side.
got it yesterday, yeah.
Okay,
Actually,
great.
or Saturday, yes.
Very good.
In Worcester County.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so again, the governor wanted to make it easy for everyone to encourage them, please consider mail-in ballot. So that's the form, and there's a prepaid envelope to send it in, so you don't have to put your stamp on it.
Right.
So you send that form in, and that starts the process. That gets you in the system to receive that ballot later
Okay.
this month.
So then I can either put the ballot in the mail or I can bring it to a drop box.
Yes, when you get your ballot in October, and if you vote it and put it right back in that same day, you have almost a month for the postal system to get it. I know all our mail goes through Easton,
Right.
but it goes to Easton and comes back.
Right.
Or we're going to have those ballot drop boxes. The state is also saying that's their target date to get us at least 2 ballot drop boxes, because we had one at the Civic Center and one at the election office, which is 345 Snow Hill Road. We will get those 2 hopefully the first week of October and have them opened, ready for voters to use. And then we've been approved for 4 total. The third one will be up north at the Wicomico Tourism Center.
Perfect. I was wondering where you're going to put it. Okay, good.
Yes, just north of Kohl's and all the shopping area up there. It's on the west-hand side.
So the north side Del Mar people, that'll be a very convenient location.
Hopefully so, absolutely. And the Parks and Rec will have the gate open. They're giving us great support.
Good.
Same with early voting. We really appreciate their help. And then we've recently, I believe just last Thursday evening, I was told we're going to get a 4th box. Our local board will be deciding this week where on the east side would be the best to put that.
Now, the last time I had some people call me with concerns because you guys had a camera focused on the box, and people somehow read that to mean that the government was watching, could see how they voted or something. And I don't mean to be dismissive of someone's concerns, but it's not there to watch them. It's to make sure that those boxes are not tampered with.
Absolutely. That's one of the guidelines that the state board office has for us. It must be under camera surveillance 24/7, and we'll put up our signs around it warning anyone
Right.
Against tampering. Sure.
Right. That whole intimidation thing is unusual because there is a lot of concern about that. And being like the fat white guy, I haven't felt voter intimidation probably in my life, so it's hard for me to understand. But the president recently talked about having officers present at polls and that kind of thing. Does that intimidate voters to see police officers around polls? Could that be a problem?
Well, we don't do any kind of survey to find out voter opinions on such things, but we want to be very, very careful and not accidentally
Right.
do things that would cause anyone to feel suppressed or intimidated in any way. So we do plan to have our regular support from the Sheriff's Department around the county and during the early voting time period, but we don't want to do it in such a way as to be intimidating. So again, we don't want to accidentally do something that might offend someone. But no, we've not done any kind of formal survey to get opinion.
Yeah, and I guess being the editor guy, when I've gone to vote before, and you've got people who have to keep a certain distance from the poll, and they're egging on their candidate, they're trying to encourage votes for their candidate, and I've had to walk through this gauntlet of people. But that's just part of the right of voting, and you have to park somewhere else and walk a different way, so you don't have to walk through those people.
Right, and again, with all the interest in the presidential election, we certainly expect there to be a lot of people wanting to have one last opportunity to try to influence voting.
Right.
And for me, I would say that that's another advantage of that ballot drop box. I kind of think of it as a 30-second polling place.
Right.
You can either go on November 3rd and stand in a very, very long line and a slow process inside due to COVID restrictions and possible high number of people there, or you could pull up in a parking lot right close to a ballot drop box, step out, put your ballot in, be back in your car within about 30 seconds, and you wouldn't have that gauntlet that you just mentioned. To me, that's another advantage.
So when can I do the final drop-off?
So we will have staff on hand at those drop locations for the close of the polls on Tuesday, November 3rd.
So drop off right through Election Day.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, you said earlier that you're going to count these in advance. Now, I hear a lot of other states, they're not allowed to count until, the midnight of Election Day. So they're worried that it's going to take several days, so their votes will be delayed in reporting. But you'll have sort of be able to move ahead on this thing, so you might be able to report everything that night.
Yes, just like the primary, we will pre-process, but we will not release results
Right.
until the polls close on election night. And that's something we do all the time in our regular elections for early voting. Early voting always finishes the week before the election. We embargo those results. We don't release those until the polls have closed.
What about the classic absentee ballots? If you're in the military, they're coming from overseas, you can't count them till the next week. How will that work?
Well, we call those UACAVA. Those are the overseas military and citizen ballots. They can do a lot of that online these days, and a lot of them do. We don't have hundreds in Wicomico County, but we certainly do have a lot in a presidential general. So as soon as they come in, they can either be pre-processed, or if they come in closer to the election, then they will also be canvassed. As you mentioned, we have canvasses every election in Maryland the following week for provisional ballots cast on election day. And then 10 days later, we have what's called the absentee 2 canvass. And ballots must be received in the Board of Election office that 10 days later, including those overseas ballots, in order to be canvassed. Now, if Montgomery and Prince George's aren't finished by that 10th day, they can still process and release results, etc. But that's the absolute deadline for a ballot to be received postmarked by November 3rd.
People also complain to me, and I'm sure they do all the time, about provisional ballots. You want to talk about that? That's if I go to the polls, I'm not on the books, but you're going to let me vote anyway until we get it figured out, basically.
Yes, provisional is a fail-safe method that if something went wrong, if a computer didn't have someone's name, for example, we can always do the research and recommend to our board afterward whether to count it or not if that voter was eligible. But another important thing this November, if a voter submits that mail-in ballot application and decides, well, I'd rather go to the polls, they're going to go early voting, or hopefully not November 3rd, but they can. We respect their choice to go to a vote center. They're going to make that line even longer. They're going to wait a long time to get to the check-in table and be told, I'm sorry, you've already requested a mail-in ballot. And they'll say, no, I'm here to vote on election day. They'll be given a provisional ballot, which is a longer process, more forms to fill out, and we will hold those until the following week, do the research and make sure they didn't try to submit 2 ballots, and then recommend to count the week after. So again, that's another thing we're preparing for. We might have a lot of people change their mind, and they need to be prepared to stay even a little longer.
So I like to vote. I like to go there and talk to the people, kind of get a sense of what's going on in terms of turnout, because I'm writing election stories at night. So I kind of need to be on the scene for that, and I prefer that. I like talking to the people. Sometimes there's candidates there, like to talk to them. So that's been my tradition, but you're giving me 3 different options this time, like 3.5, I guess. I can either go to early voting, so that way I have the experience of voting, but I'm doing it when there's not going to be so crowded on election day, when the lines might be long. I can do the mail-in voting, which is more sterile. I can't really tell what's going on, but I'm exercising my duty to vote, which is good. And I can either do that by mailing it in or by dropping it off, so that would be like 2.5. Or I can wait and go on November 3rd and risk the chance that there's going to be lines and do the traditional voting that day. So we've all have 3 options.
Yes, and again, we absolutely respect voters' choice to go on election day. That's why we're setting up, and we're getting everything prepared. But please understand that we know 2 months before November 3rd, because of COVID, 6-foot distancing, because of cleaning machines and voting booths after every person, and the screens in front of the check, we know now it's going to take a lot longer inside the area, and it's going to be a long line in front of that location. But another good thing, I think, for Wicomico is that voters won't have a whole lot to vote on. They'll have the presidential contest, Congressional District 1, 3 judges to retain in office, and 2 statewide ballot questions, which I think are relatively short. In addition, voters who live in District 2 will also have the County Council District 2 contest.
Right.
And voters who live in the Board of District 3 will have the Board of Education contest, one person running and a write-in
Unopposed
option.
in that, right.
Well, with a
the
write-in
option, right.
of course. In a general
Right.
election, you have write-ins for all of those. So the ballot won't be a lot of things. Hopefully, once they get to their voting booth and mark it and put it in the scanner and take their I voted sticker, that shouldn't take long at all. Thankfully, a few years ago we had, I think, up to question J to look at, and a lot more candidates in the gubernatorial.
Those charter amendments took forever to get through.
Right.
You know, I wrote stories about that, and the people on the council were upset. I was like, it's going to take people 15 minutes to vote. But what happens? They go in and they vote yes on everything. That's what I see happening.
Well, again,
in the charter amendments.
Sure.
Yeah.
Again, on this ballot, not a whole lot. So once we actually get your ballot to you, the process goes very quickly. It's that lead up. It's that long line. It's the having to ask you to wait while we clean, or change out judges who have to put, a new mask, new gloves, etc. Unfortunately, that's what we're saddled with, and that's why we know today there will be long lines.
Okay, your phone number again?
Office phone number is 410-548-4830.
And the website where I'm going to go to get my not absentee but by mail ballot.
Maryland State Board of Elections, www.elections.maryland.gov.
He's Anthony Gutierrez. He's trying to make sure that we have a nice, clean election here in Wicomico County. Man's under a lot of pressure. Got a lot of work to do here in the next month, and we appreciate all that you do. Thank you, Anthony, for being here.
Thank you.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. Another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and one-on-one. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.